Anyway, round of applause for Misa. And I'm a person of my word. We'll get a treat and I'll reward you for your. And who was in last place?
We didn't get to see. We just saw 1 through 5.
Oh, was it Elson? Okay, you also get a prize for being in last place. Okay,
I don't
all
think
right.
it just.
But yeah, so I hope like I said, I just want to have a little fun with getting to know you. Because I tried to ask questions that were already asked from the ones that I had been on. There were a few that I missed or whatever, but obviously Misa knows us the best. Um, I'm gonna share my screen again. Share. Okay, share. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Okay, just 1 second here. Okay. All right. I know that the CDPHE project has been brought up a few times in other meetings. Um, I don't know if anybody has ever wondered like what's going on with that project. I know I've talked to a few people about it, and I've kind of just mentioned like what I do, especially Donna Misa, talking about the field work. But that project is now coming to an end as of May 31st. So I thought it was a good time to kind of like share what was going on with that and some of the things that we were doing. This is really going to be from the perspective of the field work because that was my primary role on the project. So unfortunately, I don't have any fancy data to share with anybody. But if that's something that anybody is interested in, we can talk about it. Also, I'll open the at any point, Ellison, if you want to kind of chime in. If people please ask questions as we go through, but Ellison, if you want to kind of answer anybody's questions, if they have some things about our findings, like things like that. I was really mostly front end of this, but there were some things that I could probably speak to and answer to. And also, this is kind of a shortened version of a talk I gave back in October at the CHA conference where we talked about some field worker doing this project. The CDPHE project, the official name was Indoor Air Quality and Ventilation in Non-Residential Environments. So we were doing these commercial sites, not a lot of residential. So there were no residential. There were like a couple places that you could see that used to be like a house, and that kind of comes into play with like their equipment and the way their mechanical ventilation worked. But they pretty much operate, and that was actually a what is it called? The Waldorf School, or one of the Waldorf schools, at least here in Fort Collins. Oh, hang on. Okay, there we go. All right, so there's just a little quick project overview. So other than Ellison and I, we had Nick Good, Gavin McMeeking, Ben Swanson working on the project. We also had an undergraduate ME student, Rachel Stevens, who I know Dom has, she's been doing some floor plan stuff with us for Sapphires. So as one of her main roles is working in the CAD software to help us with the LiDAR scans and kind of converting that scan into a nice little floor plan that we would include on our reports. And then Jade Littman is a graduate student who started, and she went to a few of the sites and did some work with me. I don't know, Allison, if she did anything else on the project besides field visits. I don't know if she did report stuff or not. Um,
Uh, she's been involved in the VOC analysis with you, and this is my mistake not chatting with you first. Paul was instrumental in the first year in giving a lot of input on the report.
Sorry, Paul.
That those took.
I should have remembered that because when I first started, I definitely remember at meetings with Paul.
No worries.
But yes, don't forget, we'll give Paul a round of applause as well. And then we have the CDPHE team that we worked with on this project. So these are a list of the sites and cities and towns that we visited um, around the state. So I'm sure there were a few Friday meetings that I wasn't able to attend, and most of the time it was because I was at one of these sites. I joined this project in June of 2022. That's when I started here at CSU. And I also am not from Colorado, so my first time coming to Colorado is to move here for this project. So it's actually really fun within my first few months going to a lot of these places and seeing much of the state. And I kind of even got to the point. I think I learned my way around the state faster than any place I've ever lived, because I can't even remember the last time I even had to use GPS to get to any of the sites. I was like, oh yeah, I remember that town. I know where that is. And I would just kind of like drive there. But these are all the places we went to. I actually did go to all of these locations, but I didn't actually go to all the sites in the project. At least not for what I do with the field work, at least, if that makes sense. Because we did have to do some follow-ups, and there were some other things that we did as well, installing some indoor air quality monitors that the state provided. So the Omnis DOM that we use. So I went back to all these sites again and installed those monitors at sites that wanted them. So this is just kind of a list of the different types of sites that were enrolled in our project. And there were a lot of different types of sites. And as you know, like buildings are all different. And even as we've seen in the Sapphires project, those of us who've been in the field, I don't think we've seen any system like mechanical ventilation, HVAC, anything that's been the same, right? And that's usually not as much of a problem in the residential space, but it does prevent problems in the commercial space. And I'm sure, Paul, you've probably seen more variations of systems than I have, and it's very interesting trying to interact with those things. Especially like I said, I didn't have a background in this. My background is in public health and environmental health and safety. So there are some things that I knew and like things that I knew of and aware of as joining this project in a different lens to look at things. But I was kind of learning things, like I'm trained with Paul and some things. Nick from our project trained me up with some things. Allison's kind of like giving me a nice education on a lot of this stuff. So it was really neat learning these things in real time and then also encountering some of these things to deal with. But we have a pretty good team, a really good team actually. So we were able to figure out almost everything. I think the churches, there were two of those that were very interesting, both in their architecture. And I think one of them a monitor went missing at one of those places. Not one of our equipment that we use for monitor, but like something else. But anyway, that was kind of a funny story that the one place that something walked off was at a church. Yeah. So what were we measuring? So these are what our equipment was measuring. So related to Sapphire's project, the equipment that we've been installing, the Omnis in particular, have been doing PM, TVOC, and CO2. And then we also had the equipment we used had sensors for a couple other things that we were looking out for at these sites. And then with the TVOCs, we're also looking at VOCs. So Allison mentioned earlier that Jade was kind of helping on that. So about halfway through the project, we started doing some VOC sampling with Summa canisters, and I've been doing some stuff with that. Don't have anything to share on that, sorry, but happy to talk about it. I've been enjoying the last year and a half or so nerding out on VOCs, so always happy to talk about it. So these are like our equipment that we've been using. So like I said, my primary job has been to handle the field work. Sorry, there's a truck right outside my house right now. So what I would do is I go to the sites, I assess the site, kind of figure out what's going on. We have basically our 5 equipment set up, so actually 6, so 5 indoor, 1 outdoor. And we would set up these in different rooms around the facility. So we kind of pick what is going to be the best representation, where we're going to get the best data, what is going to give us the best idea of what's going on to the day to day. And if you've been to any kind of large building, there's always that room, 1 or 2, where no one really goes in there. So obviously those are places where we want to see what's going on. So we kind of focus our efforts, if we can, in a perfect world. We can't always do this, but and offices, lobbies, conference rooms, break rooms. I have an affinity because of my background. I always wanted to put something in a kitchen. I'm always interested in what's going on inside of kitchens. So we use the TSI Q-Tracks. I don't know, has anybody used these before? Q-Tracks, Paul? I feel like you probably used everything that we've used down here. But those I would say are our primary sensors. Those are primary piece of equipment, and that's what we have. We have 5 of those that we put around the building. And then we would always have one, so we use the pots. So we use two of them, one indoors, one outdoors. So this would kind of be this picture right here is kind of the primary setup where we would have one, everything is going to be on a tripod usually, but we'd have one in our most usually like the biggest, so usually like a lobby or an entryway or some kind of big room. That's usually where we put the pots. And then as you can see, here's the Suma canister. Those were usually always co-located with the Q track, the 5 indoors, if we could. Sometimes we couldn't, or sometimes just based on the way rooms were laid out, we might put it just across the room, but it'd always be in the same room. And then we used the LiDAR scanner. So I mentioned Rachel, who helped us with this. So I kind of walk around the building. This is probably gets the most interest from people at the site. So they see me walking around the scanner. This because it's got this battery pack and data logger. You kind of walk around and it has this nice little image on it. So people are always very interested. And that also means they can mess up the scan because they just want to stand in front of me and see what's going on. And the scanner doesn't like that. But there's just little things that we had to deal with. And then I just kind of have an interior picture of the pots if you haven't used it or seen it before. This is actually one of the outdoor ones, but the indoor one does look the same. And then we also started using this CPCs, these condensation particle counters. I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, Ellison, but this wasn't really a focus of the CDPHE project, but we were deploying it at sites for use for something else, for another researcher that people in the team were working with.
Yes, we took this study platform and embedded a sub-study about performance of a newly developed instrument that hadn't yet been validated and was sort of field validated through this study and has gone on to potentially be used at slightly larger scale, not commercial scale, but larger research scale.
Yeah, so
right.
Thank you. Yeah, so that was another piece, just kind of getting trained up on the other researcher. I can't remember where they're from, but anyway, they kind of showed me, just like everything else, just kind of learning on the job how to set these things up. So when time would afford or the site would afford, we would kind of put that up as well. And we had 3 of them, so we would try and put them in different locations. I think we also had one set up to also kind of reference some outdoor stuff, similar Dom to how we were doing with the manometers, right? We were setting those taps up, so we had some fun trying to set up taps with these copper tubes to reference outdoor for those. So that was also pretty interesting too. So this is, like I mentioned, the outdoor equipment. So really the difference here is we're using a weather station. So what's happening outside is going to influence, in most cases, what's happening inside, right? So we want to see what's happening there. So we're getting weather data. We also use this TSI Blue Sky that's measuring some things too. We were using the Omnis outside, but then I don't remember when we switched. We just decided to go with the Blue Sky. I guess we figured it was maybe giving us some better measurements. Then also, like I said, we have a Suma canister outside as well. So in addition to the equipment,
what does the Suma canister do? What's that pulling in?
Yeah, sorry. I think I might have breezed over that. So we use the Suma canisters to sample volatile organic compounds. So I mentioned, if we go back a few slides, so we have the TVOCs that we get from the Q tracks. And what that is giving us is a TVOC signal, right? So this is giving us the total signal over the 2-week period that these are set up at. But that's not really telling us what is influencing that signal the most. Like, we don't know which VOC it is. We just know like the overall thing. But the cool thing about the Suma canisters is those can be analyzed for multiple VOCs. So we work with Atmos. They're the ones who kind of analyze those for us. Is where we get the canisters from, and I take them back and they send us some data that I end up creating a report for, or creating a VOC report. So like I said, I'm doing some extra stuff with the VOC data, but like I said, we can see 61 different analytes that were there, and we can see their concentrations. The only downside though is we're not going to know at what point in time, let's say some analyte was at that concentration. We just know that's what it was. So it's samples. So what we use a flow controller that's going to sample air for 7 days. So it should fill up after 7 days, and then we cap it, send it off, and then bring it back here to Fort Collins rather, and then it gets analyzed and we get a report maybe a few weeks or so later, just depends on how busy they are.
How many VOCs did you say you analyzed for, Will?
The report we get from them has 61.
That's pretty nice.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's been it's really nice to see some of the things, especially as this has been a new thing for me, like I said, learning some of these things and kind of we can see at least the things I can see. So I don't really do much as far as report generation, giving that summary for the sites, but I am there observing and noting some things that we see at these sites. And so, and it is really cool and interesting to have some of my observations definitely validated when we see the report and when the other research scientists kind of analyze the data. So there's one site in particular I can think of. This one was, I believe it was in Pueblo. When I went there to pick up their equipment, it just happened to be when the custodial staff was doing some cleaning. And as soon as you walk through the door, you were just hit with the smell of pine salt and cleaners. And I'm like, we didn't set up SUMA canisters there at that site, but I was like, man, they're definitely going to have a pretty high signal at a certain point. And sure enough, that's what we saw. We saw that time that I noted that the custodial staff was there. We could see their TVOC signal and some other things like boom spiked at, whatever it was, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, because I think they did their cleaning, like a deep cleaning, like middle of the day. But anyway, yeah. I hope that answered your question, Jordan.
So just a
Yeah.
couple quick things. One is I'd be interested to see what the results were from those 61 for those sites that you got. Which ones seem to be the highest levels. I'll also just comment for everybody. The most common way people measure TVOCs is just with these little passive badges. So they just sit there, they absorb. It's not the omnis, but they just sit there and absorb it over however long you're there. You send it to a lab and they come back and say this much. Often those labs will give you your choice of like 3 other specific VOCs that you can ask for. And so you could look around at the house or the building and say, well, these seem like they would be plausible based on what I see. But if you guess wrong, then you've kind of lost that opportunity. You could pay for more. The up to 3 is common for we'll give you these also at the same price, but then it gets really expensive. If you wanted to do 61 different ones with the badges, it would be a killer on your budget. So that's really nice that you could get so many.
Yeah, that is neat. And it's nice that we have that resource here at CSU to do that, because I don't know. I'm about to find out when I do a literature review in the next couple months about TVOCs. So I'm going to learn even more about it, but it is nice that we have that resource here. And then I don't have any of that to share on this talk, but another meeting, happy to, or if anybody ever wants to sit down and kind of go over some of the stuff, I can show you and kind of go over the analysis I've done up to this point. About the VOCs we were able to do 18, we were sample 18 of the 50 sites at multiple cities. So yeah, we've already seen some pretty interesting stuff. I don't know, Allison, if you want to say anything more to that.
I think the data set is pretty unique as far as VOC measurements go. As Paul said, if you were to do this from an industrial hygiene perspective, you have to ask for analyses for each analyte separately, and usually is cost prohibitive. We budgeted for this early on because we thought it would be valuable to build this data set. And in each site, we have 3 to 5 locations. So yeah, not quite 100 unique observations, but 70 to 100 unique observations of several dozen VOCs. And I think it is dovetailing nice into some work that we'll be doing through the summer for ASHRAE.
Thank you. The equipment that we installed is set up for observation. That observation period is usually 2 weeks. Sometimes it will go longer depending on the operation of the site, and sometimes it might even go shorter. But 2 weeks is our target. That's what we like to do. We like to get at least 2 weeks worth of data. But in addition to that, we have to get some real-time data, right? So we're looking at their HVAC systems, the sites that have them anyway. And so there's a few other measurements and tools that we also have to set up. I would venture that Paul has also probably used all of these at some point in his career, and maybe some others on the call. But Those of us that do the field work with Sapphires, recognize the blower door system, or the blower door setup. So like I did tell Misa and Dom that we use 3 fans. So these are commercial buildings, they're very big. And sometimes they're very big, but we didn't always have to use all 3 fans, but we still set them up because you don't know. And this is pretty much what it looks like. So if you've seen the blower door set up, it's, the only difference is you don't see these 2 fans. There's obviously 2 other flow controllers and whatnot to deal with. These 2 things are bolometers, and these are what we're going to use. If you haven't used them before, we use these to measure the air coming in and out of the registers inside of the building. So really the only difference here is kind of the size and what these allow me to take measurements of. This top one right here is a RetroTech. It's kind of used for a lot of smaller ones and kind of ones that with my vertical challenges, I can get, if it's like a 7-foot roof, I can get them with this one. Whereas some of them we have a little bigger, we use this Dwyer, and the hood on this one is a 2x2 foot square. So we can get a large number. We can get much more, and it can also obviously sample or read air, or measure air from smaller registers as well. But if you've been in a commercial building or any of these like non-residential sites, you've probably seen the standard 24-inch by 24-inch register is what you're going to see, and that's kind of what this thing was made for. This photo right here is just kind of a setup of what we're doing with the actual RTUs or the furnaces themselves, getting these measurements. And yes, I have to use all of these tools to measure different pressures and flows through that system. So we're going to take the flows that we get there from the system, and then also looking at what we're getting from the registers and seeing how that works. Is it balanced out? Is it working how it's supposed to? And by how it's supposed to is by to the spec on the device or on the piece of equipment. And that's not always the case. But those are things that we find out, because a lot of times these sites, like, they don't know. They're like, oh, air's coming through the vents. It must be working, right? And then, so these are like some of the challenges I spoke about that. So, and like with the physical facilities, they're all different. So they all pose different challenges. But it was also kind of helpful too, because sometimes we run into the same problems at multiple sites, right? Like, oh, I remember how I dealt with this. And just like, sometimes we have problems scheduling our site visits with the Sapphires project, because, people have lives, they have other things to do, right? Us on this project, we have a lot of things to do, right? So trying to sync up those schedules can sometimes pose an issue, but we were able to kind of really work with it very well. And the thing I only say about the site personnel is I'm going to say never, but you don't run into problems with people at the sites. No one's ever like, oh, why are you guys here? But if anybody's ever been voluntold to do something, that's kind of what we run into, right? So if Whitney is running a facility, she's like, oh, I want my facility to be part of this project, but she can't be there. So she's like, all right, Jordan, you're going to meet with this research team when they show up. We show up, Jordan's like, who the hell are you guys? What are you doing? So sometimes we'd run into that, but we'd able to like really work through those things very easily. And a lot of times people are very happy to have us there, because once they learn about what we're doing, they're like, oh, thank you for doing this. And some people will be worried, but I always tell them, like, we're not here because there necessarily is a problem. We're interested. We want to see what's going on inside your site. So this is just some photos. We're getting close on time. I do want to leave some room for questions if anybody does have any, but also feel free to just shout them out as they go along. Just some different things working with. So I know Misa and Dom, Paul has been able to show us some HVAC equipment inside the homes and kind of talk to us about some different things, kind of like how they work. And I'm sure, I don't know if you took note, I know I did, but some of the places like that were in crawl spaces, like, oh, these are kind of awkward to get to, right? So it's one thing for us to sit there and get a nice lesson from Paul. He's like pointing out some things, but if I was there for a CDPHE project, I also have to bring a lot of stuff down into that crawl space to get some of these measurements. And if anybody who's ever noticed these things, none of these things are set up for anybody to come back and measure later. They're installed at the price they can be installed at, and they're there to operate. So really, it's like people are like, oh, I just don't want the vents blocked, and that's it. So I don't think people really think about the technicians or the the practitioners who are going into things. So I have had to kind of contort my body and move into some funny spaces to get these measurements, but all fun in the end. Always have some nice anecdotes to tell at the end of the day. Can anybody see what's wrong with this picture right here?
The belt is off of the bowling thing.
Yes, that is exactly right. So this one you might not be able to see it, but we use these similar to what we use like the hobo equipment, but we're measuring like an on and off switch is what it is, just seeing when it's on and how long it's on for. So we just calibrate it to the motor. So when I open this up, I'm thinking, this doesn't look right. And if you can't see, the belt is pretty shredded. It just came off the flywheel. So from this right here, this nice little fan is not spinning. And you can see from the little spokes in the wheel, it's not spinning. You can't see the spokes in the motor because the motor is very much spinning. The motor is running, but nothing else is working in the system. So these are just some of the things that we would see because, like I said, people just want to know at most, they're like, oh, it works or it doesn't work, and it's not a big deal. Who knows when this would have been seen had we not come up here to do the work for this project. So sometimes we kind of like uncover things at the sites, and we're not really there to fix these things. And I didn't fix this, but sometimes you might see some things like, oh, we'll just kind of straighten this out. But at the very least, we just let them know, like kind of like what's going on, because this was actually at a library in Cortez. So this is a city building. The people in the library don't get up on the roof. Some maintenance person who works with the city goes up and does that. And like most places, I would venture to say they're really probably only up there once, maybe twice a year, and that's to change filters if there's no problems with the actual device. And then this one right here, this is, if you can't tell, the filter and then the insulation from the filter access door had come loose inside of the unit and got sucked into the fan. So if you can't tell, the air through the system moves from left to right. So this is our return airflow, goes through a filter, goes to the system, then back into the building. I don't know how long this had been like this, but actually, funny enough, this building had some very clean air. And Paul, you said something at the NHPC conference that I laughed because I think I've heard it before, where you said something of, I might be getting it wrong, but like a dirty filter is a good filter sometimes because, as it's getting clogged, it's like filtering more stuff out.
Yeah, if you leave a filter in long enough, eventually it'll become a HEPA filter.
Yeah, exactly. So I think they were so clean because you had air moving through an insulation pad and a dirty filter before it went back in the building. So nothing, I guess, was getting through there.
Yeah, and that insulation pad, that is not that is pretty dense. Insulation is a filter, but like if you look at the insulation bats like you might have in an attic or a wall or around ducts or something like that, that tends to be much lower density. This insulation is for sound more than anything else. And so it's really dense. So it's going to filter a lot of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. I was not able to fix their filter problem because there's no slot to hold it in place. I think I tried to duct tape it at least to the return. And then I duct tape, engineer's best friend, and duct tape the insulation back to the door for them to kind of help them fix that. So it looks like we have about 9 minutes left. So I'm just going to breeze through the rest of these and open it to some questions from the group. I'm always happy to talk about the interesting things that we see. This one picture right here. So we don't use any infrared stuff, but I do have an infrared camera. And at one point in the project, I was very ambitious, like, oh, I bet this could be very interesting stuff it never went anywhere. But I was taking photos in the basement of a church. And I look at the photo, like, you can't tell these are 3 different ovens. Like, why is that one red? And this oven actually had been on in the basement for who knows how long. And the only reason we noticed is because Ben, one of the research scientists who was in the field with me that for this trip, we were down there taking some photos, and sure enough, we went over to kind of put our hand on it. It was kind of on the warm setting. And I mean, this is a basement, and like the lights were off. I don't think anybody had been down there for at least a week. And we were able to see, oh, your oven's on. So we turned it off for them. So that was also very interesting among the funny things we see at the sites. Anyway, but yeah, I know I went through kind of a bit, kind of fast and kind of rambled on there, but are there any questions, comments, concerns about the CDPHE project, at least from the fieldwork side?
When
Hey,
you're in
Ben, or I'm sorry, Will, I was wondering how easy was it to get people to agree to be in it? Was that hard, or they're like, yeah, come on in?
That part I cannot speak to because that was
Okay.
one of the things that CDPHE did with the recruitment and signing up. But Ellison might have something to share since she was on it obviously from the start.
Yeah, Marilee, thanks. Well, when we started the project with CDPHE, we worked on a set of criteria that considered equity, rural versus urbanicity. There was a mandate, if you will, like we had to serve at least 40% rural populations. And there were some other criteria about diversity of underserved populations. Like we went through a few rounds of thinking about, do we want to target several particular vulnerable populations, like early childhood care centers came up, elderly care centers came up, but in the end, we opted for valuing diversity of new populations over repeated groups, although that didn't preclude like a second early child care center being included. So there was quite a bit of work put into this matrix that CSU did not get to inform like the weighting that was given to different factors, but we did discuss like pros and cons. I think we reviewed more at that stage as like just a sounding board or a listening service, and then they set their criteria, and then they ran all of the recruitment activities. And I would say at reaching the 50th site, we were starting to see the effects of like, we were running out of self-selecting interested groups. But it's interesting because I think we were right at the tail of that. We really didn't ever lack for sites or like warm leads that resulted in sites. But I think had we, tried to do this for another 2 years, it would have been, it would have had to take a different recruitment strategy.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Yeah.
So, go ahead, Jordan.
Yeah, so Will, I just wanted to confirm that you were in the vents to take like airflow readings and not air quality readings.
So we did both, right? So our equipment that we leave over time, so our monitoring equipment, that is measuring the air quality over at least a 2-week period. But then in addition to everything that we kind of factor in for our assessment is we are measuring airflow through the systems, because we want to see how well or how bad the system might be working. The thing that's providing the air, like, is the air quality influenced by the fact that their air conditioning system isn't running like it's supposed to, which, that could very well be the case. So we did measure pressures and flow through the system, and that was really just to make sure, well, one, to make sure it's operating like it should. And then also, we're factoring room volumes, room size, all these other features like windows, doors, sources, like air contaminant sources, things like that. And that all kind of goes in this one package of analysis that goes into the report. And we kind of ran out of time. I was hoping to kind of like share a report so we can kind of go through that. At least kind of show you really some of the summarization of what we see at just, like a slide or two or something like that.
Nice, good stuff. Thank you.
And then going off of what Marilee asked about the, I guess, buying, like people wanting to be in the project. So Tammy, Aaliyah, and I were talking a week or so ago, kind of about, we're taking the one pager that I kind of like delivered. I kind of gave a spiel when I was down in the southwest part of the state a couple weeks ago. But we were talking about, I said, well, make sure we include, they always ask, well, what is it going to look like to be a part of this project? And I think a lot of people say, oh yeah, air quality, I want to be a part of that, so they sign up. But when we show up, not that they were ever deterred, but when they see me, just like a clown car, just a never ending, like unloading of equipment out the sites, they're just like, I didn't know it entailed this, So I don't think it ever turned anybody off, but I know people were just like, oh, I didn't know it was going to be this involved. I didn't know you're going to be doing all this. So we definitely saw a lot of surprise. And I think that kind of added to the appreciation when they see all the stuff that we're doing, like, oh, we're so happy you're doing this, And then I think some people would kind of get worried, like, oh, you're doing all this stuff. Is there a problem? It's like, oh, no, there's no problem. It's just standard. There's a lot of different measurements to take, so a lot of different tools to, do so. Maybe us on this group can just invent one tool to measure everything inside the building, and we can all retire.
One tool to rule them all. Who is the Lord of the Rings?
Yeah.
Oh, that was Marilyn. Yeah.
Hey, Will,
Okay.
real quick, do you guys gave them a report of their results, right?
Yes,
And
so,
go ahead. I was just kind of curious. It sounds like that, you went over that with them and they probably
Mhm.
really appreciated getting all that good information and stuff.
mhm. Yeah, I know that they did. I was not involved with the kind of sharing that summarization of the data with the sites, but we did have a report, and Allison, correct if I'm wrong, we have a report that we share with the state based off our initial findings, and then there is a version that is shared with the site. So there's actually two reports that are generated with our work. And I know that the sites, a lot of them were because they would say, "Oh, when am I going to get this report? When am I get the data?" Or if I went back to a site after that 2 week period to pick things up, they were like, "Oh, where's that site at? Where's that report at?" So people were always very interested to see like what they called the results from their location.
Yeah, I would just want to add one thing for Marilee's sake, just given how we've talked about the AirPen. The CDPHE gets an overview report, which is a misnomer, really. It's like a long, like imagine supplemental materials. All the data are in that report, with some summary visuals, and then the executive summary is a 1 to 3 page report that we prepare for the site, or it's prepared with them as the audience in mind. But the way that works is we send it to CDPHE, we do a debrief with CDPHE about what we learned, and then they're the face of the project to the sites on the reporting side, and then they hold a meeting with the site and talk through that report, give them the hard copy. We have a person from our team sort of present or available to answer questions. So that's what that's kind of looked like.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate knowing that piece of it.
Mhm.
Well, we're right at time, so I'll turn it over to Aaliyah to close us out.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this great presentation. Round of applause. And the game. That was awesome. Fantastic. Thank you all. That is it for the call today. So I will have all this recorded. If anyone needs to review it, it will be in the notes. And that is all. Any last minute things that I should take note of? Great. All right. See you next time.
Thanks,
Have a
guys.
Great
wonderful
job.
Friday.
That was awesome, Will.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
Will.
Nice job, Will.
Oh, I forgot. I didn't see the questions in the chat. Oh, I couldn't see them as I was presenting.
Well,
Is that-
Paul actually kind of got onto it, so it was good. Yeah.
Oh, he asked about the brewery. That one was actually pretty fun. So I did that one just before Christmas. So there was kind of like this downside before this rush of people who visit, because this was in Pagosa Springs. But there was one day I was just working so long, and I think I worked right until about 7 o'clock at night, and I just packed up my stuff, opened my computer, ordered a beer and some appetizers, and just went to work at the bar while I was there at the site, just talking to the people who I saw while I was like working there.
Perfect. Double
Yeah.
duty. I love it. That's great.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. All right. Well, I'll talk to you later.
Yeah, talk to you later.